Hi, I'm Barbara Bester, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. Nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Palm Springs, California. It's Modernism Week every February, 11 days of an architecture and design festival. U.S. Modernist Radio is on the scene interviewing nearly all of Modernism Week's keynote speakers and other special guests. We do it all at the U.S. Modernist Compound, poolside at the Hotel Skylark, right in the middle of everything. In 1947, photographer Julius Shulman made Richard Neutra's Kaufmann House famous. 66 years later, it's still a source of inspiration and intrigue. Originally built for the Kaufmann family, the same family that commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright to do Fallingwater near Pittsburgh, it's gone through a succession of owners who have worked hard to keep this iconic house intact. The Kaufmann House was once owned by Nelda Linsk, and they were both in Slim Aaron's famous poolside gossip photo. And it was once owned by Barry Manilow. It was, until recently, owned by Brent Harris, who, with his wife in the 1990s, did a full restoration and added on a pool house designed by Marmol Redziner. Last year it was made famous again in the movie Don't Worry, Darling, as the home of the evil villain played by Chris Pine.
Evil villains really do have the best taste in houses.
Absolutely. Today we'll talk with author Adele Cygelman on the two Kaufmann wives. Following that, writer Cathy Whitlock and production designer Chris Baugh talk about filming Don't Worry, Darling at the house very carefully. And wrapping things up, a very special musical guest, Noel Paul Stookey, the Paul of Peter, Paul, and Mary. Palm Springs is so full of amazing things to see and do, but if it's your first time, where do you start? When U.S. Modernist arrives in town, one of the first things we do is hop on a bus with the man rated #1 in TripAdvisor's list of Palm Springs tour guides, Trevor O'Donnell. Trevor's passion for modernist design, and especially the world of Palm Springs, is infectious. It helps that he's a great storyteller, and when you're riding around town on a bus with Trevor, there's a story on every street. The architects, the clients, the spouses, the scandals, the hidden gems of Palm Springs. Trevor knows them all. He's one big reason we love Modernism Week. And now, we love our fearless leader, the spokesperson for the martini and appetizer diet, your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. One of my favorite movies is Mermaids, with Cher and Winona Ryder.
Oh, I love it.
And the very last scene, they are dancing around the kitchen where Cher has made dinner. And the running joke in the movie is that Cher doesn't really cook. She just makes appetizers, things that she sticks toothpicks in and serve up to her kids. That's a little bit how it is going from party to party in Palm Springs. You go in, they give you a drink, and these appetizers are passed around, some with toothpicks, some without. It's a fantastic way to dine, I think. Great flavors from some of the most wonderful caterers. And I use that as my weight loss plan, really, for the week. Because I can have breakfast in the morning, skip lunch, and do martinis and appetizers for the evening. It's not #1 on the nutrition guide, but it is a lot of fun. If you'd like to go with us out to Palm Springs for Modernism Week 2024, please email me at george@usmodernist.org. It's a great time. You'll have a blast. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Adele Cygelman worked at LA Magazine before becoming senior editor at Architectural Digest and later editor-in-chief of the Robb Report collection. Adele is a native of London, and she is the author of Palm Springs Modern and Arthur Elrod, Desert Modern Design. Her recent research has focused on Edgar Kaufmann's first wife, Liliane, the woman featured in Julius Shulman's famous Twilight photo of the Kaufmann House, and his second wife, a woman who assumed hostessing duties.
That's a nice way to say it.
Yeah, at the house after Liliane retreated back to Pittsburgh. Here's our conversation with Adele Cygelman on the two Kaufmann wives.
Adele, a lot of people know about the Kaufmann House through the men that are associated with it, through Richard Neutra, through Kaufmann, through various owners like Barry Manilow. But part of your talk at Modernism Week is about the women involved in the Kaufmann House, the two wives of Edgar Kaufmann.
So, I think maybe I was having my Me Too moment. It occurred to me that the focus has been purely on Richard Neutra and Edgar and Julius Schulman because of all his photographs. And when everyone knows that one Twilight photograph of Julius's, but I don't think that anyone realizes that there's a woman in the photograph blocking the pool light. And I don't think that anyone realizes that that's actually Liliane Kaufmann and that she is one of the homeowners. And she's just sort of been banished to the shadows. No one knows anything about her, really.
But you do.
I just became fascinated with her story, and I just tried to dig deep into as many articles that I could find and all the books that have been written about Frank Lloyd Wright and Neutra and Edgar Kaufmann, trying to find out more about her and getting to understand who she was.
What did you find out?
I think that she was just an equal to Edgar Kaufmann. They were both very cosmopolitan, very sophisticated. She was as well-traveled. She was fluent in French and German. She took over one of the floors of their department store in Pittsburgh, Kaufmann's, and turned it into a very successful boutique. And she and their son, Edgar Jr., put on exhibits there. They were very much into Mexican folk art and antiques, and of course, modern furnishings. So she was just as influential as Edgar, but she doesn't get any credit.
Not everyone realizes that the Kaufmann House in Palm Springs is the same as the Kaufmann-owned Falling Water in Pennsylvania.
Right. So, how extraordinary is it that one couple, they produce, a son and heir, and they produce two of the most famous houses in the world. What are the odds? And they're working with Frank Lloyd Wright, who becomes a close friend. He does not only Falling Water, but he also designs Edgar's office at the department store, which is currently owned by the Victoria and Albert Museum. And they are building a sort of warehouse vault in the East End of London that's supposed to be open next year.
Oh, nice.
And yes, and the office should
be
on display.
Are they going to construct the office
They're
at
going
the
to
V&A?
Yes. That'd be extraordinary.
How come the Kaufmanns didn't choose Wright to build their house in Palm Springs?
I think that will be an eternal mystery. There are so many different stories, and I'm not a Wright scholar, and I'm not a Neutra scholar, so I think that would require a really deep dive into the papers. The conclusion everyone has reached is that they preferred Neutra's vision for the future. They preferred his steel and concrete structure for the desert, as opposed to Frank Lloyd Wright's much more organic, from the earth architecture.
So how was the marriage between Edgar and Liliane?
Oy. Edgar was a philanderer, I think, pretty much all of their marriage. He had mistresses who had charge accounts at the store. He took the Ziegfeld Follies girls to Paris on a trip. That's
a bold move.
Right? It's not exactly private. He's not exactly keeping this behind, closed doors. He gave one girlfriend some very expensive jewelry, and when she dumped him, he sued her to get the jewels back.
Oh, he's a classy guy.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think Liliane tolerated all of this throughout the marriage until around 1949, 1950, when a new nurse secretary was hired. I think that's probably a euphemism for mistress. Her name was Grace Stoops. She was also from Pittsburgh. And Liliane realized that Edgar had fallen in love with her. This wasn't just another girlfriend.
So this was shortly after the Kaufmann House was built in Palm Springs.
Correct. So all the effort, all the time, all the energy that they had poured into this house, Liliane only enjoyed it for a couple of years, until it was clear that, the marriage was in really dire straits, that this Grace Stoops was taking on the role of hostess.
Did Liliane realize what Edgar was all about from the beginning, or did it sort of gradually dawn on her that he was a cad?
They were first cousins, so she had known him all her life.
Oh.
And this was very much an alliance, as was, I think, very common among old world emigre families to marry your first cousin. And it was also a way for them to solidify the control of the department store.
I got it.
But I think she was very pragmatic. I think she understood from the get-go her role and what her role in life was going to be. She was a very sensible, she wasn't very warm and fuzzy, but I think that she knew exactly, what she was getting into.
So the Kaufmanns would divorce, correct?
Well, no.
No.
Liliane went back to Pittsburgh. She deeded her half of the property here in Palm Springs to Edgar. She went in search of her own country house. And then one weekend at Falling Water, she took some Seconal mixed with alcohol, which apparently is a really deadly combination. She was found unconscious by Edgar, who drove her into Pittsburgh to the hospital, where she passed away.
Yeah, that's a bit of a drive.
Yes, like a good hour and a half, 2 hours. And everyone's like, well, why didn't you take her somewhere closer? But who knows what kind of medical facilities there are out in Bear Run.
Right.
So anyway, Liliane's now gone, and 2 years later, Edgar marries Grace Stooks.
Grace. And so the second Mrs. Kaufmann, what was her life like after that point?
Well, I think about 7 months after their marriage, he passes away in the Palm Springs house. Edgar dies. She and Grace and Edgar Jr. were at the house at the time. They flew back to Pittsburgh. She had signed a prenup the day before their marriage, where she gave up her half of the estate, which was worth $10.5 million back then. In return, he gave her the deed to the Palm Springs house and shares of May Company stock. May Company had absorbed Kaufmann's.
Yeah.
So that would guarantee her an annual stipend.
When was this?
So early 1950s.
Okay.
And she contested the prenup. And she filed a lawsuit in Pennsylvania. And that went through the process until about 1961, where she lost the case. At that point, she had moved into a small apartment. I don't know what kind of, income she was getting then. But she had also contracted multiple sclerosis. So she became a wheelchair-bound invalid. And one day, the heating pad in her wheelchair caught fire, and she dies of acute carbon monoxide poisoning and severe burns. And she's like 41 years old.
Oh.
Crazy, right?
And this was, I think, around the time or within a few years when Edgar Jr. gives Falling Water to the Conservancy?
That I'm not sure of. I
Okay.
haven't done enough research on that because I just didn't want to get down that rabbit hole. But yes,
Right.
I mean, he was given Falling Water, as well as they had a property up in Canada.
I had heard at some point along the way there was going to be a second house in Palm Springs for Liliane. What was that all about?
So around 1950, toward the end of 1950, for whatever reason, she decides that she wants to have her own house across the street. And she approaches Frank Lloyd Wright, who is still nursing a bruised ego after not getting the commission in the desert. And he comes back with these beautiful renderings of what he calls Boulder House. And they are intended for Liliane and E.J. Kaufmann, is what he writes on the rendering, so not just for her. But it's this beautiful, just sort of this sweeping, organic, rising from the boulders house with a couple of swimming moats because she loved to swim, and what looks like from the renderings like a water chute going down to another level. So that's what's kind of, it's fascinating. Can you imagine if they had been built side by side? Frank Lloyd Wright and a Neutra, and how you would see the philosophical differences so clearly. And he, in a corner of the one rendering, you can see what he calls, I'll get you out of that nasty, nice cliche. And he's referring to the Neutra house, and he sort of pencils it in very faintly in the background of his rendering. Looking at the back of the house, the back side, I think very deliberately.
It would be pretty interesting if that house had gotten built. It would have been the second crown jewel there on Vistacino, where the house is located now.
Exactly. On the south side. So everyone thinks I asked the architect Leo Marmol, who had worked on the restoration of the Kaufmann House, and he thinks it would be so up and then to the left. So maybe across from where the Lowy House is behind the Kaufmann House. That's where he thinks it would have been located.
Okay. When Liliane and Grace were in Palm Springs for the time that they were they very active on the social scene, or were they more keeping to themselves?
Liliane wasn't so much. There are a couple of mentions in articles of they threw a dinner dance for everyone involved with the construction of their house.
Okay.
She mentions in letters to Richard Neutra about, that Mr. and Mrs. Neutra and Liliane had gone for a walk around the area looking at gardens because Liliane was very interested in landscaping. And they went to a cocktail party. This is Liliane and Edgar for the new house of Raymond and Viola Lowy, but that's about it.
Okay.
So I don't think that she was socializing. I think once Grace came into the picture, Edgar was much more visible, and they were much more involved with civic things, and they were charter members of the Palm Springs Historical Society.
Oh, okay. Do you see a book coming out of this, Adele?
No, I don't think so. But I would love to do a documentary. I think that would be fascinating.
That would be a great documentary.
Because it's much more visual.
Is there much extant footage of all these folks?
There's nothing. So I don't know how this would happen.
So
There would be still photography.
Okay.
And wouldn't it be great if there were, I don't know, if there were any archival TV interviews? I don't think.
Super 8 movies or something like that hidden in a shoebox somewhere.
Wouldn't that be fantastic?
Can't you fake that?
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Sure.
We need the Don't Worry Darling team to
Right,
that's true.
recreate.
Exactly. Well, they did it once. They can probably do it again.
We need Harry Styles back.
Yeah.
Adele, thank you so much for talking with us. I appreciate your coming by again.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It's always great to be here.
We were speaking with Adele Cygelman at Modernism Week.
Cathy Whitlock is a film journalist and author of Designs on Film, A Century of Hollywood Art Direction. Her articles on film, travel, set design, lifestyle, and celebrity have appeared in publications like The Hollywood Reporter and Architectural Digest. Chris Baugh is a film location manager based in Marina del Rey, California. He's a graduate of UC Irvine.
Go Anteaters.
Anteaters, really?
That's what it says here.
Chris also studied at the Sorbonne in Paris.
Go Baguettes.
That can't be right, Tom. I don't even think they do sports. Chris scouts and secures locations for film and TV productions and received 2 nominations for the 2022 California On Location Awards, one for Babylon and another for Don't Worry Darling. Cathy and Chris participated in a Modernism Week panel discussion on the movie's set designs and one of its most spectacular locations, Richard Neutra's Kaufmann House. And now we go poolside to our conversation with Cathy and Chris. Cathy, before we get started talking about the film, is it true that you have a TV remote in every room of your house?
Yes, it is true. I'm a giant TV person.
Yeah.
And, when I was growing up, we had TV on 24/7, well, as much as we could. And I don't know, I just always liked the sound of the TV on in every room.
Do the remotes have TVs talking to them? Or?
No.
Oh, so you just have the remotes.
No, I just have a remote where the TV is in every room.
Okay.
I think I have 5 TVs in my house.
Wow.
So what are your favorite channels to monitor day by day?
Well, I'm a big news junkie, so I watch a lot of CNN and MSNBC, and I watch a lot of Netflix.
When did you first hear about Don't Worry Darling as a production?
The studios send me things out about a year in advance so I can plan my editorial calendar. We knew it was going to be a really big film based on the cast and also based on the setting. So in terms of stories about production design, I thought this is just going to be nirvana. And also when they hired Ariane Phillips to do the costumes, we knew that they were going to be over the top wonderful as well and very period perfect.
So unlike the movie Palm Springs,
yes.
This one's actually filmed in Palm Springs.
Yes, exactly. Well, didn't they film some of Palm Springs at the Parker?
A little bit.
Or, yeah,
A
just
little
bit.
Yeah, but mostly it was somewhere north of here, and you could tell it wasn't Palm Springs.
Yeah.
When did you first become associated with the film, Chris?
I got a call from the producer in August 2020, so that was right in the middle of the
Pandemic.
Correct. Their film had been delayed. They were supposed to go earlier in the year, and then the pandemic hit, and I was asked to be the location manager. They were planning to film about 3 months after that, later in the fall. Mm-hmm. So August in Palm Springs, it's pretty hot. It's triple digits, and come on out and scout. So we were scouting in pretty extreme heat.
Scouting and sweating.
I mean, that's serious, right? There was a few times when you're out there, walking in the desert and start to get a little dizzy and
Little hallucination.
realize,
Yeah.
I mean, like, wait a minute, I think my body might not hold up for this. So, we were running back to the air conditioning and drinking water. I mean, you actually, I'm serious. You had to be careful.
Right, you do. How did you find references to get the locations? What kind of sources did you use?
So I'm a location manager, and that involves, in the introductory phase, you have to scout these locations and finding them. That's actually the fun part. And so I have background in film history and theory and criticism, but I'm very interested in architecture and photography. So it's just my personal passion is to pay attention to these types of things. So I read a lot of books, and I was very familiar with Palm Springs, and I spent a lot of time out here. I'm a resident. So when I got the call, that felt like a stroke of luck, really, because this was right up my alley. And so I already knew my favorite places. So, number one on the list, Chris Pine's character was sort of like a dark villain who was leading this private community.
And all dark villains have cool houses.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. So you need to think about those types of things when you're scouting locations. I mean, he's not going to live in a small house with flowers in the front yard and a white picket fence.
Unless he's incognito.
Yeah. So he was supposed to represent power and style and coolness. And so the directive from Olivia Wilde, the director, and the production designer, Katie Byron, those are the two people that I would report to, was to try and find a house, where the most powerful person in town would live. And originally it was supposed to be up in the hills with a view looking out over the city. And
Like the Bob Hope house?
we scouted it.
Yeah.
I try to be thorough, and there's a long list of beautiful homes, the Elrod house, that we wanted to take a look at and try to get in. And it was actually, that's pretty fun scouting expedition. We had months out here to look at every cool house we could find and resources to do it. And,
That's a great gig.
It's a great gig. So everyone knows, the Kaufmann House is the ultimate. And that actually was a house that was untouchable. It had no history of being used in any film or television ever.
Oh, really?
That's true.
After all these years?
After all these years.
After that picture?
There's a reason for it. Now, it was used for still photography from time to time, but rarely. But filming at a property can be hard on a property, and that's a very fragile house. It was built in 1946. Richard Neutra designed it, and it was extremely fragile. And
So how did you persuade Brent Harris to let you use it?
well, I had help. I had a liaison out here, Catherine Mailer, who runs a company that...
And has a Neutra house herself.
Yes, Catherine. Yes, she does. And so she has a company where she liaisons between film companies. So she really made the introduction, but I wrote a letter. I mean, I think the first few requests were no, and I tried to address Brent Harris, who owned the home at the time, his concerns. And
How many letters did you write?
I think 3.
Okay.
Three in varying levels of detail, and it's a big responsibility. I don't want to be the person who destroys a classic gem like the Kaufmann House, right? So that is on my mind, and I do consider that when I am presenting a film location to a film company. I mean, the film company, they have a primary objective to make their film. The crews are large. It's over 100 people. There are a lot of technicians. They bring in heavy cables and lights, and they're moving quickly. So it was my job to protect the house. So I took that very seriously, and we have special companies that specialize in exactly that. So we put down special flooring. We basically bubble wrap the house. We did a few things that were unusual for film crews. It's the first time crew were not allowed to wear their shoes in the house, even when they were filming. So you'd have these technicians running to bring in a light or a prop or an actor. When they got to the front door, it was a stop.
Now, did that apply to the on-camera actors as well, or no?
No, but they were a little more
Directed?
gentle.
Yeah.
They weren't as rushed. So
They could be more careful when they're going into the house.
Yeah. So we took it extremely seriously, and there were a number of other things I proposed, that hiring people we had an entire team just to watch the house. Like you might see in a museum, we had a person just sitting in each room. That was
like on-set docents.
Yeah.
On-set docents is exactly what that was. And they had the power to kick people out. They had the power to kick out the film company. And they were in each room. And, it's really for a crew member, if you walk into a room and nobody's watching, nobody's there, they might be a little rougher than they would if somebody's standing at and staring at them. So that was just a philosophy, and it was effective.
Okay. Cathy, tell our audience a little bit about the plot of the film without giving away the ending. What is the storyline here?
It's about a couple, Jack and Alice, who of course played by Harry Styles and Florence Pugh, and they're living in this town called Victory. And the husband works for the Victory Project, and the boss is the cult-like leader, Frank, played by Chris Pine. And they live in this sort of idyllic setting, and the women, cook and clean all day and have cocktail parties in the front yard, and everything starts to turn dark. And that's probably as far as I can go with that.
Somebody in the movie figures out not everything is as it seems.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And it begins to unravel.
Right.
There were a lot of comparisons in the movie to the two Stepford Wives.
Yes.
I was going to say, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Except with better scenery.
Right. Definitely better houses, too. Yeah.
Yeah. How long were you in the Kaufmann House, Chris, to film this?
I'd say, I think we shot there, I believe, 2 days.
Just 2 days?
2 days. Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of preparation for 2 days.
Yeah.
It was.
Did you wind up recreating any of that house interiors on a set somewhere?
Yeah, we shot everything there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, good for you.
Yeah, thank you. And we shot
or the production crew.
And we shot elsewhere in town. I mean, we Palm Springs was such a beautiful community.
You were over on Azul Circle,
which
is now the tourist destination for everyone who's seen the film.
It is. I have not heard that information yet, but it wouldn't surprise me.
I drove over there, and there were already 4 cars there at 9 in the morning.
Really? Wow. And I hope that the residents are enjoying it.
I didn't see any residents.
Yeah. So that's Canyon View Estates.
Yeah.
And that's a fantastic community built in the early 60s. And that was another area that we spent quite a bit of time searching for. It had to be a kind of a consistent, beautiful utopian. I mean, for us, we were looking for a utopian community. And in the language of film, we were looking for expansive and repetitive architecture, but with a lot of style and design to it. And that was that Crystal and Palmer built that community in the early 60s. They did a fantastic job. I think the designer said to me, when I showed pictures, she said, I've been looking for this community my entire life.
Well, it certainly makes it easier when you want to put a set together. You've got all the elements right there already in a house, for the most part.
Yeah, so actually the interiors were on a stage in Los Angeles.
They were, okay.
And they did a good job, if you believed you were really there.
Yeah.
But the actual homes are fairly small, and we needed about double or triple the space. So we copied the design and just kind of expanded it. And we took photos and made backdrops. We made, 80-foot tall curtains with photos of the mountains to hang outside the back door. And we built the backyards on a stage and lit them. And it's pretty convincing.
I understand that one of the locations that you filmed was called Volcano House, which is not actually in Palm Springs, but about 100 miles away from here.
Yes, that's in Newberry Springs.
What is it exactly? Is it a house?
It's a house. Now I'm forgetting the architect, but that was a
Bessner.
Bessner built it also in the 60s on top of an actual volcanic cinder cone, and they took it seriously. This wasn't just a one-off. It's a really beautiful piece of work, and it's built well, and it's gorgeous with lots of natural woods inside. And that came up. We were actually looking for Chris Pine's character's home at the time, and so that's...
I'm glad you didn't choose that one for Chris Pine's home, because it's a little too alien looking.
It was a little too much, right. So that went into one file, and then when we were looking for this... So this was the headquarters of the Victory Project, which is this kind of secret corporation which runs the territory. It's almost like an Oz type of environment. And so we were looking, originally it was supposed to be like a tunnel into a mountain or something like a science fiction type headquarters. It doesn't really exist. So we were looking, and if something was an actual building or an actual headquarters, it wasn't quite fantastic enough. And we were scratching our heads and digging through files and came across the Volcano House, and I pitched that as its headquarters, and it worked. It was different than what was scripted, but then they adapted the design of the community and the house and everything to the Volcano House. And the fact that it was set out in the desert, there was this whole sequence where the final chase scene where they're leaving the community and going to this headquarters, that was originally a very set in downtown Palm Springs, driving through streets and people crashing on sidewalks. But because we had this remote location, we shifted that to dry lakes. So we were immediately left the community of Canyon View Estates, and we were on to a dry lake and filmed some pretty elaborate.
You could do a lot more on a dry lake than downtown Palm Springs.
Yes, you could. We were flipping cars, and it was pretty fun. But it was a very distant location, and it's something you would never stumble across unless you knew what you were looking for.
You knew where you were there.
And the owners that own that house really aren't interested in visitors, and they were very private, and they were concerned about that their property would be taken care of. And that also worked out. It's gated, and it's probably might be 50 acres or something, and you really can't get to it.
Yeah. That's helpful when you got something gated like that.
Yeah.
Kaufmann House here for decades has been visited by double-decker buses.
Mm-hmm.
Where
Yes.
people are up on top and you can look around and see, inside the house as they go by. Fortunately, the owners weren't there that often, so it really wasn't a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine if I owned a home and you had people driving by, that would be, if you weren't in the mood for it, that might be frustrating. I mean, we had experienced that while we were filming. People would bus pull up and unload while we were in filming and, start walking onto set.
No.
Yeah.
How would they get in?
Well, people just like, wow, is this the Kaufmann House? And they're in that mindset.
That's why you've got those docents.
Yeah, I mean,
And the Dobermans.
Security stopped them, but I mean, a few got past the goalie, and we would get them. I mean, everyone was very nice, but it was constant. When we were scouting, and homeowners were really concerned about security and keeping their privacy. I mean, naturally,
Sure.
but we chose that house just because it was really, if you think about it, it's one of the most magnificent examples of modernist architecture in Palm Springs. I mean, arguably, you could say that. It's beautiful. It's perfect.
It is. Cathy, as a writer about film and architecture, there are a number of different movies that portray some idealistic place that is not what it seems. I can think from years ago when there was The Prisoner on TV, and he was in this little English village and would try to escape, and this giant balloon would nab him at the ocean and bring him in. In that genre of film, what are some of the themes that you see over time?
It's funny. I look at the architects on film, and they seem to be all tortured beings. Well, of course, Stepford Wives, but I didn't feel like the sets were all they were cracked up to be. I saw a house, and that was about it. I don't know. I have to think about that for a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
I also did the movie Holiday that was directed by Nancy Myers. And I don't know if you recall, that was Cameron Diaz, Kate Winslet,
Yes.
Jack Black, romantic comedy.
Oh, yeah, right.
Set during the holidays.
Yeah.
And the two characters do a home swap between Los Angeles and Surrey, England. And so the directive on that was to find a house that was the most iconic home of Los Angeles. So think about Los Angeles, you think about the Mediterranean style. But the whole Mission Revival movement was started by Wallace Neff. And that was introduced as a concept. Everyone thought it was a fad, and it really took off. So I thought, what does Wallace Neff's home look like that he built for himself?
Oh, yeah.
So that was the first home I scouted, and that was in San Marino, next to Huntington Library. And that actually was the home that was used for Cameron Diaz's house.
Oh, nice.
His own home. So,
And what did you choose in England?
it was a field, and we built the exterior. And this interior was the stage in Culver City. It was a fake.
Okay, okay.
And we also shot a Neutra house in that film as well. Jack Black's character, who was a musician, we filmed at a Neutra home in Silver Lake for that.
Well, which one was that? Was that Silvertop?
I can't tell you.
The one with the big sort of half-moon window in the front?
It wasn't one of his bigger ones. And in that area, I think the street is called Neutra Place, and there's 4 or 5 of them.
Oh, yeah. He was in a Neutra in Silver Lake.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right on the water. But,
Yeah. Maybe the VDL house or...
Yeah, that was 17 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So
There's lots to choose from. There are about 10 in that neighborhood.
Yeah, correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's a beautiful neighborhood. So it comes up, if there's ever a chance to find something exquisite by one of these known architects, I try to pitch it.
So there are house locations generally in every film of some sort or another, typically. So what determines when a house becomes a place people want to visit after a movie and the ones they don't? What
The
sort of
interiors.
The interiors?
The interiors. And
Okay.
I was going to address Nancy Myers. I mean, the interior design community watches her movies just like a Bible and copies everything to a T. Something's Got to Give, which, of course, was shot in New York on a soundstage. I mean, that's one of the most copied interiors ever. That, and it's
And
complicated.
the turtlenecks, right, that Diane Keaton was wearing?
Exactly, yeah. And then It's Complicated, which was supposed to be in Santa Barbara. I believe they shot most of that in New York as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
That was John Hutman was the
Yeah,
production designer.
yeah, no, John, yeah. But anyway, but those are definitely big films, and I think that people really love to go to a movie and they get inspired and they come home and I've got to have that paint color, that chair, that piece of furniture, whatever. So
Well, aren't we all looking for inspiration anywhere
Yes.
you can,
Yeah,
whether it's
yeah.
movies or magazines, and films are so predominant in our culture. That,
But speaking of architects, I want to address too that Katie Byron, who was the production designer on the film, she was very inspired by Albert Frey, and she developed a color called Albert Frey blue. And so when you see the film Jack and Alice's house, there's kind of blue teal curtains, and even some of the dresses she wears have that Albert Frey blue.
Where
and the
did she
kitchen.
draw that from?
I don't know. I mean, she just
Okay.
she saw a room that had that blue color, and that she just ran with it.
Okay.
I think she pulled some colors out of the Kaufmann House. It
Most of the
wasn't
Kaufmann House
blue.
was yellow, though, right?
Right. But she did pull a few out of that and use it. I don't know that the blue might have been developed
Yeah.
uniquely. but,
Anyway, she's called it Albert Frey
Yeah,
blue.
yeah.
That was her
I think
reference.
Can you get it
point.
at Sherwin-Williams?
No, I don't think so.
No. Katie Byron was an amazing designer, I just have to say.
Yeah,
I mean,
she's
she was
great.
very highly sensitive and tuned into these things. And, when she reproduced her sets, felt real and felt like they were true, like modernist gems.
Right.
She didn't, sometimes people push it a little too hard or go a little too over the top. She didn't do that.
Yeah.
There were two famous residents of the Kaufmann House. I was wondering if they were in the film or not. One being
Barry
Manilow, and secondly Nelda Linsk, who is the woman in the Slim Aarons photo.
So we were in touch with Nelda, and she came by set, but no, neither of them appeared in the film.
Okay.
Well, it's not supposed to be their house.
Correct.
Right,
yeah.
but they could, people come on as cameos or extras.
Oh,
and
that's
things
true.
Like that.
It was discussed, actually, but we were at the height of COVID, and it was just too tricky to
Yeah.
that bubble.
Well, thank you both for coming in and chatting
for
with
having
us
us.
about the house. It's a great film, and for any fan of Palm Springs and architecture, it's just a visual delight.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
George and I were speaking with Cathy Whitlock and Chris Baugh.
I last saw today's special musical guest, Noel Paul Stookey, with Peter, Paul, and Mary at a political fundraiser in the late 80s in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was great. My delightful 7th grade English teacher, Sylvia White, who randomly shows up in my life every decade, was taking tickets. It was an evening filled with their classic songs and hope that the future and how people were treated in the future would improve everyone, particularly those whose rights had been trampled on for centuries. Part music group, part social justice crusaders, their music had a message that we could all do better and that the politicians who make public policy decisions could do much better. How'd that work out, as Dr. Phil loves to say? Well, we're going to need some more concerts. Noel is a graduate of Seaholm High School
Go Maple Leafs!
and Michigan State University,
Go Spartans!
and he has been a recognized singer-songwriter for more than 6 decades, recording more than 50 albums, and is a founding contributor to KidLinks, an organization supplying original musical compositions for children's music therapy. He is co-founder, with his daughter Liz Stookey Sunday, of Music to Life, a nonprofit that supports activist social justice musicians. He has contributed the proceeds of his wildly classic A Wedding Song, over $2 million so far, to charity. Now in his mid-80s, Noel is still making music. His latest album is Faz, Now and Then. Welcome, Noel.
Thank you so much, George. Nice to be here. Hi, Tom. Thank
Hi.
you. Nice to be in such pleasant company and such memorable company. I did a concert the other night with Peter, which is kind of rare nowadays. Since Mary passed away in 2009, we do maybe a half dozen a year, particularly because of COVID. But I was remarking that When I turned 82, I used to tell a joke about being diagnosed with dyslexia. That was the bad news. The good news was that I had just turned 28.
I wish.
But that joke gets harder and harder to tell when you get to be 86.
86. It's okay.
Our research team, Noel, found out that you were there the day Martin Luther King Jr. had his I Have a Dream speech, and you've been advocating for social justice ever since. What was it like to be there at that moment in history?
Well, that moment was actually happened twice. And I didn't realize the wisdom of it at the time. Peter, Mary, and I offloaded at a site near the Washington Monument, not the Lincoln Memorial. And that was where the entire cast assembled. And we went through the program, even to the point where we heard Dr. King speak. From there, we marched with, a certain amount of gravitas to the Lincoln Memorial. And we all knew why we were marching in a way that we perhaps wouldn't have known if we had just pulled up in a taxi cab and hopped out and gone to the Lincoln Memorial. So it had a real aura to it. When you walk, and I don't think I would have, I know that I didn't have the same perspective on it as the established left-wing participants, my partners, Peter and Mary. I didn't have their kind of perspective coming from the Midwest and being late even to political songs. But Mary turned to Peter during the circumstance and said, "We are watching history." And there was a perception and an objectivity that I have come to really admire much more even after her passing.
Wow. This was 1963.
March of 1963. And such a group of companions from such diverse, we're talking James Baldwin, we're talking, Marlon Brando, we're talking Charlton Heston, opposite sides really of the political scale. And yet unified in the sense that this was about equity for all citizens in this country.
That's a pretty special moment. I have watched that speech over and over and some of his other speeches lately. And of course, I was maybe 2 at the time. So I didn't get to catch all that excitement like you did, but it really is inspiring now still.
Did you turn to your mommy and say, "Mommy, I had a dream too"?
I imagine some kids did.
Yeah.
I would imagine so, yeah.
Noel, the wedding song is your most famous song, but it wasn't really meant for the public in the beginning. It was a wedding present to Peter, right?
That's exactly right. As a matter of fact, I usually tell a joke about it. When Peter came and asked me if I would bless his wedding with a song, that's how he put it. I felt a little like that character in the Woody Allen film that hands the bank teller a note that says, "I don't have a gun, but I know where I can get one." I knew I wasn't authorized to dispense blessings, I have said in the past, but I knew where I could get one. And oddly enough, the prayer was really more specific. It's more like a request. If you can do such an audacious thing from the divine, I said, "How would you, capital Y, manifest yourself at Peter's wedding?" That was the phrase. And then the lyrics just came so fast. And we're not talking about the muse here. I have moments with the muse where I'm casting about looking for some inspiration. This was not that. This was a direct answer to my question. And when I sang the original lyric for my wife in the motel room prior to the wedding, which was, "I am now to be among you. At the calling of your hearts, rest assured this troubadour is acting on my part." When my wife heard it, she said, "They're not going to understand you. They're going to think you're announcing yourself as the second coming." And I had to admit that she was probably right, because I had just gone through such a spiritual experience that I was, I was being pretty flagrant about this new belief of mine. So I changed the lyric to "He is now to be among you." Well, here we are, some 50 years later, and one of the stumbling blocks for the church is the patriarchal nature, the imposition of a patriarchal nature.
Right.
And I have told audiences before, they get a kick out of it, if I owned a bumper sticker company, I would make one that said, In matters of theology, it's well that we remember, in Christ there is no east or west, in God there is no gender. And I usually get applause, particularly from the female section of the audience for that. And then I sing it with the updated lyric, which, 50 years after the fact, people can accommodate the fact that I'm a poet and not a savior,
Noel wrote the wedding song in 1969, and it became a hit single in 1971. Despite beautiful versions by Petula Clark, Mary McGregor, past podcast guest Tony Tennille, Harry Belafonte, and many others, Noel remains the definitive OG. What's more, you can find the video online of the song's 25th anniversary, and Noel's facial expressions of love and respect and change and hope fully tell the story that his hands are playing and that his voice is singing. Here's Noel with the wedding song.
Rest assured this troubadour was acting on his part. The union of your spirits here has caused him to remain. For whenever two or more of you are gathered in his name, there is love. Shall leave his mother and a woman leave her home. They shall travel on to where the two shall be as one. As it was in the beginning, is now until the end. Woman draws her life from man and gives it back again, and there is love. Man and wife, is it love that brings you here, or love that brings you life? Or if loving is the answer, and who's the giving for? Do you believe in something that you've never seen before? Oh, there's love.
The sound of that 12-string is quite unusual for a couple of facts. One, it was double tracked, and is the only instrument that's on the track, aside from my voice. There is no bass, there's no accompanying strings, but the overtones of this 12-string were quite remarkable. As a matter of fact, the 12-string was built by Nick Apollonio in Maine, where I currently live, and it's such an unusual design. I think they call it a casket guitar because it emulates the square sides and angular bottoms constructed from woods that were on board ship. If there was no instrument available, sailors would construct their own guitars made from flat sides. So it had an unusual sound to begin with, and I was really pleasantly surprised when I was able to contribute it to the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. And I just met the person who runs that organization. And got the book. I haven't been on a tour of it, but I understand that you have, George.
Yes, I have. It's a wonderful modernist museum. We took a group to Phoenix to tour buildings there before the pandemic, and that was one of the places that we went. Besides being a great building, it's a marvelous museum of music and instruments and performances that are happening there all the time.
And interactive. And I think that's what the decidedly different aspect of it is.
It is really remarkable that you're pointing out that it is just a double-tracked 12-string guitar, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Right. And your voice and nothing else, because it sounds like a little symphony. And it's kind of amazing.
George mentioned the new album, Faz, which is, while it's a new album, it also was a reminder of me that for years, since the advent of Peter, Paul, and Mary's Getting Together, I have been counseled by my experience and reverence for jazz. And so I play a lot of, I guess, what you would call color chords. There's a vast difference between an A major and an A major seventh, because the A major seventh suggests a kind of intimacy and a romance that the straight A chord doesn't. However, it's not always a wise choice. Depends on the song, what the song was trying to say. I can remember Peter cautioning me backstage before going on, saying, "Noel, you don't play A7ths on Woody Guthrie tunes." And I had to agree. It would probably be inappropriate.
No, you were part of this great era from the mid-'60s to the '70s of social activism, and the world was going to one day just hold hands together and kind of go into peace. And we got a little bit of that, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Are we going to have another era like that coming forward? Is there another time where we're going to be hearing musicians like you singing more on the radio?
I'm not sure that that's the way it's going to happen, but there is going to be another era forthcoming, because I don't think that our children or our children's children are going to allow the world to descend into the kind of animosity that it currently expresses. I'm not sure I would have felt that way 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Things were looking pretty desperate, and then whoopee, along came COVID to take our minds off the desperation. But I have the sense that people are beginning to understand the value of their own personal contribution to world peace. Now, I know that sounds a little ambitious, but if you've ever heard a song of mine, or if you have the opportunity to plug it into the program today, there's a song I wrote called Revolution, One by One. It says, I'm going to start a revolution. I'm going to take it to the street. I'm going to smile at every solitary person that I meet. I'm going to wave at total strangers, no matter where they're from. I'm going to start a revolution. I'm going to win it one by one.
Nice.
And the acceptance of that concept that we, this poor, weary old world will only move forward in terms of its caring for one another by your singular expression to your neighbor, or to the person who has just become your neighbor. And by neighbor, I mean proximity.
Well, we all have to do our part.
Amen.
That's the important message. Now, your latest jazz album, called Faz, has a track on it called I'll Be Seeing You, which is written by Sammy Fain, lyrics by Irvin Cahal, published in 1938. It was in the musical Right This Way which closed after 15 shows, but the song was picked up for a movie in 1944 and took off. Bing Crosby took it to number 1, and past podcast guest Brenda Lee recorded the song as the final track of her 1962 album, Sincerely. Billie Holiday's 1944 recording was the final transmission sent by NASA to the Opportunity rover on Mars when its mission ended in 2019. And Liberace says goodbye to the boys in the final episode of the classic show Beavis and Butthead in 1997. From his new album, here's Noel with I'll Be Seeing You.
That this heart of mine embraces all day through. In that small cafe, the park, across the way, the children's carousel, the chestnut tree, the wishing well. I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day, in everything that's light and gay. I'll always think of you that way. I'll find you in the morning sun, and when the night is new, I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you. Everything that's light and gay, I'll always think of you that way. I'll find you in the morning sun, and when the day is through, I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you.
Noel, has anybody ever told you have a great voice?
Yeah, Betty says she doesn't. My wife says, I don't know if I like it when you croon so much. that song was sung. I wouldn't have known that song were it not for the favorite of the former bass player of Peter, Paul and Mary, Richard Kniss. And when he passed away, his wife requested it, and I did it with a bevy of other musicians at his memorial service.
How appropriate.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful song.
Goodbye. Yeah.
Yep. Noel, thanks so much for joining us. The new album is Faz, and people can learn more about you at noelpaulstookey.com. That's NoelPaulStookey.com.
Almost sounds like a jingle, but STOOKEY.
Don't you have that chain of restaurants by the side of the highway?
Right.
With the pecan logs?
Yeah, Stookey's. That's Stookey's.
Oh, but it wasn't pronounced Stookey, was it?
No. Well,
Stuckey's?
I think it was Stuckey's, yeah.
Okay.
I know.
Oh, close.
I was making a joke.
Thanks, Noel.
You bet. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
You can hear Noel's song Revolution at revolution1x1.org. Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs. Want to go with us to Modernism Week in 2024 and stay with us at the U.S. Modernist Compound? Email me, george@usmodernist.org.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.1 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Kelly Policelli researched all the guests for our Modernism Week interviews. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back in 2 weeks with another Looking at the Mountains edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.